in the Wilderness Environmental Medicine Journal in the coming future. But yeah, aside from that, gunshot wounds, heat injuries, predominantly heat exhaustion. The guys were building defensive positions, filling sandbags, lugging materials backwards and forwards. They didn't have access to fantastic food. They were just drinking bottled water constantly for days. So there was probably people verging on the verge of hyponatremia. But interesting times. Whatever we dealt with, a lot of it was improvisation. Gunshot wounds dealt with T-shirts and socks or 4x4 gauze. We had a little bit of IV kit to manage the serious things, but it was really triage. It was prioritisation. Do we give this guy a bottle of water or IV him? You know, we probably need the IV for the guy in shock or the guy that's been stung by a scorpion. We didn't have a lot of kit. I literally had what was on my belt and in the pouches on my body armour. The ambulance had gone. That was back in the capital. The clinic had been raided, pilfered. By who, we've got no idea, but by the time we got back there wasn't much left. So yeah, we lost all of our main resources, all of the technology, all of the protocols went out the window, and we literally fell back to wilderness medicine protocols. Interesting times. We were pulled off the rig about the following day, really. Headed back to the city, gave a debrief, handed in the evidence, and then we were shipped out. And I've never been back to Kurdistan since. But interestingly, it just shows how you can plan, you can look at your epidemiology, your medical intelligence, look at what the risk is from the fauna, flora, the industrial activity, the endemic diseases in the local area, the terrorist activity, and you can prepare well for that. Everything from life packs to 14-gauge needles to vacuum mattresses, TXA, anti-venom. But one day you might lose all that technology and end up going back to wilderness improvisation, roll of duct tape and a chest seal, which is pretty much all we had at the time. And that's where my Kurdistan journey and encounter with ISIS ended. They were throwing mortars and rockets at us, and they were gradually creeping closer and closer and closer until eventually, presumably, the American Air Force came in and gave them the good news, and it all went quiet, and we took the opportunity to bug out. But it always makes you wonder what happens next. We left the country, ISIS got moved back into Mosul, and what happens next? And I guess that's going to be the subject of one of our next podcasts. Interestingly, one of my colleagues, Paul Pinder, worked on the adjacent oil rig, but he was out on leave at the time. He later left and then went to work for a voluntary hospital, a field hospital in Mosul. So he was on the front line facing ISIS and dealing with polytrauma and running a hospital trauma team. So hopefully we're going to interview him in the future and see what the ISIS battle and the battle to save lives was like right on the front line. As medics, we're generally multi-skilled, flexible, adapt well to change, and are expected to pull rabbits out of hats at short notice. That's not to say we shouldn't be adequately prepared, adequately trained and equipped for the unexpected or possible changes. In this case, on the oil rig in Kurdistan, all of the medics on the adjacent rigs as well, they were all ex-military. They all had previous military experience and weapons experience, and we knew we were integrated into the security team and expected to perform security functions within the team when we weren't providing medical care. So a lot of it is management of expectations. Perhaps we wouldn't drag somebody off an ambulance that had never been in that kind of environment or never served in the military and put them on the front line in Kurdistan where ISIS may turn up and knock on the door. So it's really selection and preparation of the right people for the right job at the right time.
Awesome, Zach. And really interesting for me because I've not worked in that role and in a different sphere. So for you, what preparation, courses, experience prepared you to deal with that situation and still become a patient advocate as such?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, it was such a diverse role. In the days leading up to that incident, we had several expat engineers come to me with chest pain. We had a case of anaphylaxis. We had a couple of scorpion stings. rashes, cold, coughs, dermatitis. Then we had a couple of industrial accidents, not particularly that week, but prior to it, amputations, burns, falls from height, that kind of thing. So I think the paramedic course, a blend of the paramedic course with ACLS, with PHTLS, and the offshore medic course give you a good solid background between the two of them, plus the bolt-on CPD or continuing education courses, give you enough to manage patients, medical emergencies, trauma patients. I think the offshore medic helped me. I wasn't a military medic prior to that, so didn't have a lot of primary care experience prior to being on oil rigs, prior to doing the OSM course or going on expeditions. So the mixture helped as well, I think, the blend. Doing the Advanced Wilderness Life Support course and the WMS Fellowship of the Academy of Wilderness Medicine, I think helped. Helped with the environmental stuff, heat, snakes, scorpions, improvisation, not having that set mindset that I must have my ambulance with a life pack, with a suction device, with a ventilator, that you can operate with what's on your belt and what you stood up in with a roll of duct tape. But probably one of the best bolt-on courses was the NAEMT, National Association of EMTs, military TCCC course, Tactical Combat Casualty Care. Just looking at the phases of TCCC, bleeding control, tranexamic acid, analgesia, fluid resource, evac, kind of just helps you put everything into context. So I don't think there's one particular course that helped there, everything. I mean, using we didn't get involved in the firefight ourselves, but having the ability to look after yourself, weapons, GPS, taking grid coordinates, using the technology around you. So it's, the whole host of things contribute to the preparation.
And part of that is kind of why we've developed the Red course, because they're essentially medical courses in different environments. But they don't teach you survival in whatever location, your camp discipline, routine, how to live, unless you're from the military and you kind of, it's part of the job. If you're not a military background, and there's some fantastic, amazing people who would be ideal, but they would be totally out of the depth. Things like not leaving your boots out, how to get in a hammock, how to get in a sleeping bag, wet-dry routine, all these kind of things, because your medical courses, but you had that kind of foundation to add them to anyway.
Yeah. Even things like water treatment. We end up using a 30,000 litre container of water which was pumped straight from the river, so we had to dig out the protocols and chlorinate the water to make it safe to wash in, etc. So it's a whole host of things out of your normal day-to-day comfort zone.
So, you've got the skills and knowledge, and you know I love kit. What, in that kind of environment, what would be your favourite kit essentials? And I know we're medics and we do tend to overpack, but the classic half it again, what is your ultimate go-tos?
Okay, interesting question. For this particular case, so to put it in context, we were located on an oil rig in the desert, in a remote location west of the Kurdistan capital, Erbil, probably about 20 kilometres from Mosul. So we're in the middle of nowhere, essentially. If we wanted to evacuate patients, it was about an hour and a half, 2 hour drive, if there was no roadblocks, traffic accidents or terrorist activity. So we were likely to have to do prolonged field care on site if there was any issue. So on a normal day-to-day basis, during normal operations, I would say cardiac monitor is essential. I've worked on rigs before where we didn't have a cardiac monitor, and it's not ideal, not when you're operating by yourself. So cardiac monitor with a defibrillator incorporated. Easy IO, you know I like Gucci kit. That's my go-to when you're understaffed and you've got one or two patients or a serious patient and you've only got one pair of hands. It's nice to have that little bit of kit that just speeds things up. So Easy IO, TXA, falls from height, fractured pelvis, fractured femurs, explosions, penetrating wounds. You know, it's nice to have TXA. Some of the companies we worked with in the past, with them being security companies, had no idea of the benefits and therefore didn't want to spend the money. It's not that expensive. but the benefits, particularly being in a remote location with prolonged transport times, well worth having on board, at least 1,000 milligrams. Stethoscope, and reach back to a decent doctor. So good communication systems and a good doctor that understands the environment, not just primary care, not just trauma, but the whole wilderness element, who's going to be a rock when you need him in the middle of the night.
And I'm going to add one for me. If you've got space in the budget, ultrasound.
Yeah, God, we're converted now, aren't we?
Yeah, fast scans, measuring ocular nerves for ICP. I'm a convert, so...
Yeah, that's why we've got it on the helicopter now. It's absolutely fantastic, and it'll be in the Pelican case on the next expedition. That's on a normal day-to-day basis. Sitting in a clinic, studying online, seeing your patients, doing health and safety inspections, preparing to respond to emergencies. But when the wheel came off, as I mentioned in the previous recording, the ambulance was left in the city, and we had what was attached to us, really. So I had a belt kit. I think I had a small rucksack with a few other bits and bobs in the back. But for me, essentials, comms. Without communications, you can't operate. Whether it be between rigs or back to your base or back to your medical director, between vehicles, you just can't operate in a hostile environment, in a team environment, without decent comms. So that would be ensuring you've got the right credit on your phone. The credit on your satellite phone's not going to expire. You've got enough to get the job done and be able to talk through a whole case. Decent radio systems. CAT tourniquet. Everybody should have their own IFAC attached to the body anyway. Individual first aid kit. Ideally with 2 tourniquets. Chest seals. Epi. Particularly because we had a couple of incidents of scorpion sting, etc. And one of the few things you've mentioned before, you can't improvise your drugs. Analgesia. I'd probably opt for ketamine in that environment. And then the last one, sun hat, because I very nearly became a casualty myself, burning within about 20 minutes of lying on the sand. So yeah, I'd say they're the essentials that were strapped to my body that really came in useful. Everything else was improvised. The incredible thing is I trained my drivers over and over again. Started off just showing them how to get the stretcher out the ambulance, then how to help me spinally immobilise patients if it was needed, then taught him CPR, bleeding control, and really never expected him to have a role in that. We had a primary care doctor, there was me, and never thought for a minute he'd be involved in treatment himself until the day we came back and he's waiting for us. There's a guy stood there with his hand in the air with the medic's or the ambulance driver's T-shirt wrapped around his hand. He dug out blind. So I think if I was to give any top tips, I'd make sure that your kit's attached to you. If it's not attached to you, you'll forget it. It'll be left on the ground, it'll be strewn around, it'll be in the back of a vehicle somewhere, probably on the floor, and just as you bug it out, you think, oh, sugar, I've forgotten that. So yeah, essential kit should be strapped to you. So passport in your pocket, IFAC on your belt, weapon slung over your shoulder, radio clipped to your belt. Once you start bugging out under pressure, if it's not attached, you lose it.
Which is interesting, because when we do the aviation survival, and there are statistics that say if it's not attached to you, you will not have it.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of guys, a lot of pilots, a lot of CP lads with the really Gucci grab bags, which are ideal. However, it's the same as the pilots. It's chucked in the back of the helicopter. If something happens now, you're going to be running. You ain't going to have it with you.
Yeah, and there are a lot of guys on the circuit that know that now, and they sling the grab bags over their shoulder all the time. So if they bug out, it's attached to them. They're going to be dragging it, and it'll be flapping around, bouncing around, but it's attached to them. We've probably got maps in, water, first aid kit, comms, spare batteries. A lot of guys are carrying grab bags now, and I think they're fantastic, but attached to your body when you're on ops. Get used to being out of your comfort zone and train that way. So don't necessarily train on the oil rig every day with a scoop and a vacuum mattress and a cardiac monitor and all the Gucci stuff, a ventilator. Learn to train with limited resources in a resource-poor environment. Learn to improvise and look at the benefits of it. You can, in most cases, achieve the same outcomes with limited kit. And just to repeat, train your team. When the wheel comes off, There's not going to be a load of expat medics around you. There's not going to be support from hospitals. The cavalry are not coming.